Hi everybody and welcome back to AGS Stories. Today's post comes from the subreddit Am I the A-hole and is by user ThrowRA Forgotten Son. The story asks a powerful question. Am I wrong for refusing to help my estranged father after everything he put me through? Buckle up, because this one's an emotional roller coaster filled with family betrayal, resilience, and a decision that will leave you wondering, what would I do in his shoes? Let's dive in. The day James walked out on his family was a day that would leave scars for years to come. He was 45 then, a man tired of the mundane grind of life, or so he claimed. His wife Linda stood at the door, her voice trembling as she begged him to stay. Their 15-year-old son, Ethan, watched from the living room, his fists clenched in quiet anger, unsure whether to cry or scream. But James didn't waver. His words cut through the air like a knife. I deserve better than this. I'm done sacrificing for you two. With that, he grabbed his duffel bag and walked out, slamming the door shut on the family he once called his own. Linda, a kind-hearted woman in her early 40s, was left to pick up the pieces. She had always been the glue that held the family together, but James's departure left her shattered. The weight of raising Ethan alone, coupled with her ongoing battle with a chronic illness, proved too much. The medical bills piled up faster than she could manage, and soon, even keeping food on the table became a daily struggle. Ethan, just a teenager, had no choice but to step into the role of an adult. He worked before and after school, juggling odd jobs to help his mother pay the bills. His once carefree demeanor was replaced with a quiet determination fueled by resentment and an unrelenting drive to survive. The years that followed were anything but kind. Linda's health continued to decline, and with no support from James, she was forced to forego treatments that could have prolonged her life. Ethan, now in his early 20s, buried his mother alone, standing at her graveside with tears streaming down his face. The home they had fought so hard to keep was lost shortly after. Homeless and alone, Ethan spent 2 grueling years on the streets before clawing his way back through sheer grit and determination. But life has a way of bringing ghosts from the past back to haunt you. Now in his late 20s, Ethan has built a successful career and a stable life for himself. Just when he thought he'd buried the pain of the past, James reappears, this time with a plea for help. What could a man like him possibly want from the son he left behind? Ethan braces himself, knowing that some wounds never truly heal. Ethan sat at his kitchen table, the glow of his laptop casting a faint light on his face. He had opened the email again, reading it for the 3rd time, hoping this time it might make more sense. But it didn't. His father, James, the man who abandoned him and his mother when they needed him the most, was asking for help. Not just a little help, but $100,000. Ethan scoffed at the absurdity of it, his mind racing with anger, confusion, and an overwhelming sense of betrayal. How could someone who walked out of their family have the nerve to ask for such a thing? Memories of his teenage years flooded back, unbidden and unwelcome. He remembered the night James left, like it had happened yesterday. His mother, Linda, had stood at the door, pleading with James to stay. She begged him to think about their son, to remember the family they had built together. But James didn't care. He had been so focused on what he thought he deserved, so eager to chase some imagined freedom, that he left without so much as a backward glance. Ethan remembered watching his father walk out the door, feeling a mixture of anger and helplessness. That was the day his childhood ended. The years that followed were nothing short of brutal. Linda tried her best to hold everything together, but the strain of being a single mother while battling her illness was too much. Ethan, barely a teenager, was forced to grow up quickly. He took on odd jobs, mowing lawns, delivering newspapers, bussing tables, anything that could help put food on the table. He worked before school, after school, and sometimes even skipped meals so his mother could eat. It was exhausting, both physically and emotionally, but he had no choice. His mother needed him, and he wasn't about to let her down like James had. Ethan's voice cracked as he recalled how Linda's health declined rapidly. The treatments she needed were expensive, and with James gone, there was no way to afford them. He vividly remembered the nights he would sit by her hospital bed, holding her hand and reassuring her that everything would be okay, even when he didn't believe it himself. The hospital visits became more frequent, and each time she seemed weaker. By the time Ethan turned 18, Linda was gone, leaving him alone in a world that felt unbearably cold and unforgiving. He paused, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. He wasn't sure how much of this he wanted to share with the community, but he knew he needed advice. Writing it all down was painful, but it also felt like a release, like finally unpacking the years of grief, anger, and loneliness he had carried for so long. Ethan continued typing, recounting how he had lost the house shortly after his mother's death. With no money to pay the rent and no one to turn to, he found himself living on the streets. He described the sleepless nights, the hunger, and the shame of scavenging for cans just to make a few bucks. It was a kind of despair he wouldn't wish on his worst enemy. But even then, he never gave up. He found a way to keep going, working odd jobs and saving every penny he could. After 2 years of scraping by, he finally landed his first stable job. From there, he clawed his way out of poverty, determined to build a better life for himself. Fast forward a few years, and Ethan had done just that. At 29, he was a successful real estate developer with a growing business, a beautiful home, and a family of his own. He had worked harder than most people could imagine to get where he was, and he was proud of it. But even now, the scars of his past lingered. The abandonment, the loss, the struggle, they were all still there, buried beneath the surface. And now, James was back. The man who had caused so much pain, who had left them to fend for themselves, was asking for $100,000. Ethan couldn't wrap his head around it. What gave James the right to waltz back into his life and make such a demand? Did he think money could erase the years of suffering he and his mother endured? Did he think he could just buy forgiveness? The email didn't offer much in the way of an explanation. James had written that he was in a tough spot and needed help getting back on his feet. He mentioned hearing about Ethan's success and how proud he was of him, as if that would soften the blow. But there was no acknowledgement of the past, no apology for what he had done. It was as if James expected Ethan to forget everything and hand over the money without question. Ethan leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. Part of him wanted to tell James to go to hell. After everything he had been through, he didn't owe that man a thing. But another part of him, the part that still remembered what it felt like to be abandoned, was conflicted. He knew what it was like to struggle, to feel like you had no one to turn to. Could he really turn his back on someone, even if that someone was James? He decided to ask the community for advice. He knew he couldn't make this decision on his own, not with all the emotions clouding his judgment. He began typing, laying everything out for them to see. He shared the story of his father's abandonment, his mother's illness, and the years of hardship that followed. He told them about his success and how he had built a life for himself despite everything. And finally, he explained James's sudden reappearance and his request for $100,000. "What would you do?" Ethan wrote, his fingers trembling as he typed the final sentence. "Do I help him, or do I walk away like he did to us? I need your advice." He stared at the screen for a moment before hitting post. The story was out there now, for better or worse. Ethan closed his laptop and leaned back in his chair, feeling both relieved and vulnerable. He didn't know what kind of responses he would get, but he hoped they would help him make sense of the tangled mess of emotions he was feeling. As he sat there in the quiet of his kitchen, he couldn't help but wonder what his mother would have done. She had always been the forgiving one, the one who believed in second chances. But she was also the one who had suffered the most because of James. Ethan shook his head, pushing the thought aside. He would wait for the community's advice before making his decision. For now, all he could do was wait. Ethan's post quickly gained traction online. Within hours, hundreds of comments poured in from people eager to share their thoughts. The raw honesty of his story struck a chord with many, stirring deep emotions and sparking intense debates about family, forgiveness, and responsibility. The responses were a mix of empathy, support, and some tough love, each perspective adding layers to the already complicated situation Ethan faced. One of the most upvoted comments came from a user named Real Talk Renee, who shared a balanced perspective. "Ethan, first of all, I just want to say how much I admire your resilience. What you've been through is unimaginable, and it's a testament to your character that you've built such a successful life despite it all. That being said, I think you need to think carefully before making a decision. If you help your dad, do it on your terms. Make sure it's something you can live with, not something you'll regret later. Remember, you owe him nothing, but if you choose to give, let it be because it aligns with your values, not because you feel obligated. Another commenter, @forgive-but-not-forget, says, lean toward a more empathetic stance, though still cautious. Ethan, I'm so sorry for what you've been through. It's heartbreaking to hear how much your dad's absence cost you and your mom. But here's the thing. People do change, and sometimes life humbles them in ways we can't imagine. Maybe this is your dad's rock bottom, and he's reaching out because he genuinely regrets what he did. That doesn't erase the pain he caused, but forgiveness isn't about letting him off the hook. It's about freeing yourself from carrying that burden. If helping him feels right to you, maybe start small. You don't have to give him $100. Set boundaries. Not everyone was in favor of helping James, though. A more direct response from @ToughLoveTina resonated with those who believed in holding James accountable. Are you kidding me, Ethan? This man abandoned you and your mom when you needed him the most. He left her to die without proper treatment and left you to fend for yourself as a kid. And now he wants to waltz back into your life, play the proud dad, and take your hard-earned money? Absolutely not. He made his choice years ago, and you've already paid for his selfishness once. You don't owe him a dime. He can figure it out just like you did. As Ethan scrolled through the comments, he found himself nodding at some and bristling at others. Each response felt like a reflection of the war going on inside his own mind. He appreciated the support and advice, but the conflicting opinions only made the decision feel heavier. Some users even shared their own stories of estranged family members, creating a sense of solidarity. One person described how they had cut ties with a neglectful parent, while another shared how they had forgiven and rebuilt their relationship with a once-absent father. The diversity of experiences and emotions was overwhelming, but also strangely comforting. It reminded Ethan that he wasn't alone in dealing with the complexities of family dynamics. Ethan closed his laptop and let out a deep breath. The advice was helpful, but it didn't make the decision any easier. He had always been a logical thinker, but this situation wasn't just about logic. It was about emotion, history, and scars that still hadn't fully healed. He glanced at his phone, wondering if he should call James and demand answers before making a choice. For now, though, he decided to sit with the advice and give himself time to think. No matter what he decided, one thing was clear. His story had touched a nerve, not just for him, but for everyone who read it. It was a reminder that family is complicated, forgiveness is hard, and sometimes the people who hurt us the most are the ones who force us to confront who we really are. The community had given Ethan a lot to think about, but ultimately, the decision was his, and he wasn't going to rush it. The days following Ethan's post were a blur of emotions. The flood of comments, advice, and personal stories from strangers around the world had given him plenty to think about, but it didn't make his decision any easier. Every word of encouragement reminded him of how far he had come, while every suggestion of forgiveness forced him to confront wounds he thought he had buried long ago. For the first time in years, he felt like he was standing at a crossroads, unsure of which path to take. After a few sleepless nights, Ethan decided it was time to take control of the situation. He couldn't ignore the gnawing curiosity about why James had reached out after all these years. Was he genuinely remorseful, or was this just another selfish ploy from a man who had mastered the art of taking without giving? The only way to find out, Ethan reasoned, was to meet James face to face. But this time, it would be on his terms. Ethan crafted a short email, concise and direct. He agreed to meet James, but with conditions. "We'll meet at my house," he wrote, keeping the tone formal. "I expect honesty. If you want my help, I need to hear the truth about everything. Why you left, why you never came back, and what you've been doing since. If you can't be honest, don't bother showing up." He hovered over the send button for a moment before clicking it. The ball was now in James's court. As the day of the meeting approached, Ethan found himself grappling with memories he had spent years trying to forget. He thought about his mother, Linda, and the sacrifices she made after James left. She had been the rock of their small family, working herself to exhaustion to keep a roof over their heads and food on the table. Even as her illness worsened, she never stopped fighting for Ethan's future. He could still see her frail hands gripping his, whispering words of encouragement when he felt like giving up. The thought of James sitting at the same table where Ethan had spent countless nights studying, eating, and consoling his mother filled him with a mix of anger and sadness. How dare he come back now, pretending to care after leaving them to fend for themselves? And yet, a small part of Ethan wondered if there was any chance that James had changed. Could a person who caused so much pain truly feel remorse? Ethan prepared himself for the meeting, both emotionally and mentally. He practiced what he wanted to say, standing in front of the bathroom mirror and imagining James's face. He wanted to be firm but not cruel, to ask the questions that had haunted him for years without letting his emotions spiral out of control. Most of all, he wanted to honor his mother's memory by standing up for the boy she had fought so hard to protect. When the day finally arrived, Ethan couldn't help but feel a knot of anxiety in his stomach. As he waited for James to arrive, he paced around the living room, glancing out the window every few minutes. He had told himself he was ready, but the sight of James's car pulling into the driveway sent a jolt of adrenaline through his veins. It was the same car James had described in his email, a beat-up sedan that looked like it had seen better days. Ethan took a deep breath and opened the door before James could knock. James stood there, looking older than Ethan remembered. His hair was thinning, his face lined with wrinkles, and his posture lacked the confidence he had once carried. But there was something else in his expression, a mix of hesitation and vulnerability that Ethan had never seen before. "Ethan," James said, his voice breaking slightly, "thank you for agreeing to meet me." Ethan stepped aside, gesturing for him to come in. "Let's talk," he said, keeping his tone neutral. He led James to the dining table, the same one where so many of his memories were etched. They sat across from each other, the silence between them heavy with unspoken words. For the first time, Ethan looked James directly in the eye and asked the question that had plagued him for years. "Why did you leave us?" James hesitated, his hands fidgeting nervously on the table. "I thought I was doing the right thing," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. "I thought, if I left, you and your mom would be better off without me." Ethan's jaw tightened, but he forced himself to stay calm. "Better off? You took everything with you, James. Mom couldn't afford her treatments because of you. She died because of you." James looked down, his shoulders slumping. "I know," he said, his voice cracking. "I know I failed you both. I wasn't strong enough to handle the pressure, and I ran. I've regretted it every day since." Ethan wanted to believe him, but years of pain and anger made it hard to trust anything James said. "If you regretted it, why didn't you come back? Why wait until now?" James sighed, rubbing his face with his hands. "Because I was ashamed," he admitted. "I didn't know how to face you after everything I'd done. But now, I don't have anywhere else to turn." Ethan stared at him, his mind racing. Was James telling the truth, or was this just another manipulation? He couldn't be sure, but one thing was clear. He wasn't ready to make a decision yet. "I need time to think," Ethan said, his voice firm. "I'll let you know what I decide. But don't expect me to forgive you just because you showed up." James nodded, his expression a mix of relief and defeat. "Thank you for even listening," he said quietly before leaving. As Ethan watched him drive away, he felt a swirl of emotions. Anger, sadness, confusion, and maybe even a sliver of hope. He returned to his laptop and updated his post, sharing the details of the meeting with the community. "I don't know what to do," he wrote. "Part of me wants to help him, but part of me feels like he doesn't deserve it. What would you do in my shoes?" Ethan hit post and leaned back in his chair, staring at the screen. He knew the decision ultimately rested with him, but for now, he needed guidance. The story wasn't over yet, and Ethan wasn't sure how it would end. All he knew was that the weight of the past wasn't something he could carry alone. After sharing the update about his meeting with James, Ethan's post sparked another wave of responses from the online community. This time, the comments delved even deeper into the complexities of his situation, with some encouraging him to find peace through forgiveness, and others urging him to stand firm and protect himself. As Ethan read through the replies, he couldn't help but feel both comforted and conflicted. Everyone had an opinion, but no one had the definitive answer he was looking for. One of the top comments came from Healing Through Forgiveness, who empathized with Ethan's struggles but advocated for reconciliation. "Ethan, I know this is a tough situation, but holding on to anger will only hurt you in the long run. Your dad clearly made terrible mistakes, and it's not your job to fix him. But forgiving him doesn't mean letting him off the hook. Forgiveness is about freeing yourself from the weight of the past. Maybe start by helping him in a small way, like finding him resources or offering advice, instead of giving him money. That way, you can protect your boundaries while still extending a hand." Another commenter, Cold Hard Truth 87, took a much harsher stance. "Listen, Ethan, I get that people want to see the good in others, but your dad doesn't deserve it. He had decades to make things right and didn't bother. Now that he's broke and desperate, he suddenly shows up? That's not love or regret. It's convenience. You've worked too hard and sacrificed too much to let someone like him take advantage of you. If you give him money, you'll never see it again, and chances are he'll come back asking for more. Protect yourself and your family. You don't owe him anything." Ethan found himself nodding at both comments, torn between the desire to move forward and the fear of being taken advantage of. His own thoughts swirled with contradictions. Part of him wanted to believe that people could change, and that helping James might bring some closure to the pain he'd carried for so long. But another part of him couldn't ignore the years of silence, the abandonment, and the deep scars James had left behind. "I think the hardest part," Ethan wrote in another update to his post, "is that I don't know if I can ever trust him. How do you forgive someone who left when you needed them most? And even if you forgive, how do you protect yourself from being hurt again? I'm still trying to figure it out. Thank you all for your thoughts. It's helping me more than you know." As he posted the update, Ethan stared at the screen, unsure of how the story would unfold. The advice from the community was invaluable, but the decision was his alone, and the stakes felt higher than ever. Ethan sat in his car outside the diner, where he had agreed to meet James. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the parking lot, and he found himself gripping the steering wheel tighter than necessary. This wasn't the first time he had confronted his father, but something about this meeting felt final. A part of him dreaded what was to come, yet another part was eager to say everything he had held back for years. James was already seated when Ethan walked in. He looked older, more worn, with lines carved deep into his face. He waved hesitantly, a weak smile crossing his lips. Ethan nodded in acknowledgement and slid into the booth across from him, maintaining a deliberate distance. The server came by to take their drink orders, and for a moment, silence hung heavy between them. "I appreciate you meeting me again," James started, his voice tentative. "I know I don't deserve it." Ethan leaned back, his arms crossed. "You're right, you don't." James flinched at the bluntness, but Ethan wasn't in the mood to soften the truth. He had spent too much of his life carrying the weight of his father's choices to offer him the comfort of sugar-coated words. "I just need you to understand," James said, his hands clasped together on the table. "I made mistakes, big ones. I let fear, pride, and selfishness get the best of me, but I've been paying for it every day since I left." "Paying for it?" Ethan scoffed, shaking his head. "You think you've been paying for it? You have no idea what it cost us. You left us with nothing, James. Nothing. Mom couldn't afford her treatments because of you. I had to work 2 jobs just to keep the lights on, and even then, we lost everything. She died because of you. And he paused, his voice breaking. "I spent 2 years living on the streets because of you." James looked down, his face a mix of shame and regret. "I didn't know things got that bad," he murmured. "Of course you didn't," Ethan shot back. "You weren't there. You didn't care enough to check. You just walked away like we didn't matter." James's eyes glistened, but Ethan didn't relent. The words poured out of him, years of pent-up anger and pain spilling over like a dam breaking. Do you know what it's like to sit by your mother's hospital bed, knowing you can't afford to help her? Do you know what it's like to lose your home, your childhood, your sense of security? All because the one person who was supposed to protect you decided he deserved better. You don't get to sit here now and act like you're sorry. It's too late for that. James wiped at his eyes, but Ethan didn't feel an ounce of sympathy. This wasn't about making James feel better. It was about finally standing up for himself. I know I can't undo the past, James said, his voice trembling. But I'm here now. I want to make things right. Ethan leaned forward, his tone icy. You want to make things right? You want to fix this? Let me be clear. You can't. The damage is done. You weren't there when it counted, and I don't need you now. You don't get to show up after all these years and expect me to bail you out. James opened his mouth to argue, but Ethan cut him off. And as for meeting my son, forget it. You gave up the right to be a father the day you walked out that door. My family doesn't need someone who only shows up when they need something. We're better off without you. James sat back, defeated. I was hoping you'd be different, he said softly. I thought maybe you'd see that people can change. Ethan shook his head. Change takes more than showing up when it's convenient. You made your choice, James, and now I'm making mine. The conversation ended there. Ethan stood up, leaving James at the table with nothing but the weight of his own mistakes. He didn't look back as he walked out, the sound of the diner's bell marking the end of a chapter he had long dreaded revisiting. Later that night, Ethan sat in his living room, watching his son play with a set of blocks on the floor. The boy's laughter filled the room, and Ethan felt a pang of bittersweet emotion. His mother's face flashed in his mind, her gentle smile and unwavering determination to protect him. She had given everything for him, and now he was determined to honor her sacrifices by being the kind of father James could never be. For the first time in years, Ethan felt a sense of peace. Confronting James hadn't erased the pain of the past, but it had given him clarity. He didn't need closure from his father. He had found it within himself by standing firm and protecting the life he had built. As he tucked his son into bed that night, Ethan whispered, Your grandma would have loved you, buddy. And I promise I'll always be here for you. Always. The next morning, Ethan shared a final update with the community. I met with my father one last time, he wrote. I told him everything, the pain, the sacrifices, the truth about what his absence cost us. And then I walked away. I realized that I don't need him to fix what he broke. I've already done that for myself. My mom taught me how to be strong, and now I'm teaching that to my own family. Thank you all for your support. It means more than you know. Ethan closed his laptop and took a deep breath. The story was over, and for the first time, he felt ready to move forward. Ethan's journey is one that resonates on so many levels. It's not just a story about a father and son. It's a testament to resilience, the weight of responsibility, and the courage it takes to set boundaries with those who have hurt us. Through his struggles, we've seen the devastating effects of abandonment and the strength it takes to rebuild when the odds seem insurmountable. But more importantly, Ethan's story reminds us that healing doesn't always mean reconciliation, and that's okay. One of the most profound lessons we can take from Ethan's experience is the importance of taking responsibility. James's decision to abandon his family left scars that never fully healed. His absence forced Ethan and his mother into unimaginable hardships, and while it's easy to hope for redemption, James's unwillingness to take responsibility for his actions sooner made it clear that some bridges are burned forever. This serves as a stark reminder that our choices don't just affect us, they ripple out, impacting those we love in ways we may never fully understand. At the same time, Ethan's story highlights the power of resilience. Despite losing everything, his home, his childhood, and even his mother, Ethan refused to let his circumstances define him. He fought his way back, step by step, building a life he could be proud of. It's a powerful reminder that even in our darkest moments, we have the strength to persevere. His journey shows us that while we can't control the actions of others, we can control how we respond and who we choose to become. And finally, Ethan taught us the value of boundaries. It's never easy to say no to someone who once held a place in your heart, but sometimes it's necessary. By standing up to James and refusing to let him disrupt the life he had worked so hard to build, Ethan demonstrated the importance of protecting your peace. Setting boundaries doesn't make you cruel or unkind. It's an act of self-respect and a way to honor the journey you've taken to get where you are. Now, it's your turn to reflect. Have you ever faced a situation where you had to choose between forgiveness and protecting yourself? How did you handle it? Or maybe you've been in a position like Ethan, where you had to rebuild after someone let you down. We'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Sharing your experiences not only helps others, but also reminds us all that we're not alone in navigating life's challenges. If Ethan's story resonated with you, or if it made you think about your own relationships in a new way, we'd love for you to support our channel. Give this video a thumbs up, leave a comment with your thoughts, and share it with someone who might need to hear this story. And if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe to AGS Stories for more powerful tales of resilience, redemption, and lessons that inspire us all. Thank you for being a part of this journey with us. Ethan's story reminds us that while life can be incredibly difficult, there's always a path forward. Whether it's through forgiveness, setting boundaries, or simply finding the strength to move on, we all have the power to write our own endings. We'll see you in the next story. Until then, take care and remember, your story matters.